Megan, okay, so you got the women's tournament. Iowa wins. It was an amazing final game, went to overtime. Iowa's only second overtime game of the season, I believe. But it's how we got there. So lead us up to that championship game. What occurred?
I mean, what I love about the tournament this year was it was exactly how the regular season was. Just crazy. Like things made sense and then things didn't make sense. So everything, as our pal Mike Hall says, was chalk up until the day of the quarterfinals, where that means, the seeds that are supposed to win and move on. I didn't realize what that meant until he kept saying it. So new term for me. But we get to the quarterfinals, Ohio State, Maryland, and Ohio State looks not great in that game. And Maryland absolutely carries that momentum on. Next game comes Michigan State, Nebraska. Nebraska on fire. Michigan State could never find their legs. Then we get to the night session. Iowa handled Penn State pretty handedly. And then Indiana was up 17 in the third quarter and loses to Michigan. So it's really interesting. And it kind of goes for both sides. I'd love to hear what Robbie thinks about this. But a lot of coaches were saying, especially the coaches that were top 4 seeds, they felt like their opponent had an advantage because they had played in the arena the night before and already was accustomed to the environment, the surroundings, the depth perception, all of that stuff. So they kind of felt like they were a little more ready. And that certainly was the case. Nebraska is a team I do not want to play in the NCAA tournament if I'm anybody in the country. They are on freaking fire. Jazz Shelley balled out. They had to have hit like 85 threes as a team in this tournament. I don't know exactly what the number was, but it was high and crazy. Maryland's a team, punched their ticket, had to have after beating Ohio State. And Michigan, another team that was maybe on the bubble, has to be in after making to the semifinals. So biggest takeaway is that Iowa just somehow finds a way to get it done. They will likely be a 1 seed now in the NCAA tournament. I would say you're now officially going to get probably 7 or 8 teams in after how competitive their showing was in Minneapolis. Really exciting.
Does Michigan State losing in its first game affect their tournament odds?
No, they're still in. They've done too much good on their resume in the regular season to have that be much of an impact. They may drop seeding. Like my concern from them is they might go from like a 6-7 now to an 8-9, which is always the position you don't necessarily want to be in. But regardless, like they're in. There's no doubt about that.
So you got Iowa, Ohio State, Indiana, Michigan State, Nebraska, Maryland, Michigan that you're thinking. I just said 7
are in. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That seems fair. Yeah, Cheyenne Sellers from the Terps looking at the camera saying we're peaking at the right time.
I mean, it was so much fun. And like, that's another team, like you don't want to play in March. And, they've dealt with injuries, Maryland has, and a lot of outside noise talking about how they weren't as good as normal this year. But death, taxes, and Brenda Frese in March is a simple formula. A lot of success. It's like Izzo in March, Brenda Frese on the women's side in March.
Yeah, it was cool to see, especially like Nebraska. I know they were like just missed the tournament last year. And so I know Amy Williams is probably super pleased with the effort. I know we're talking about the Big Ten here, but like, how can we not have this conversation without I'm not even going to South Carolina, LSU. I want to talk South Carolina, Tennessee. Robbie, did you see this 3-point shot from Camilla?
Yeah, they didn't guard her. It reminded me of Evan Turner just walking into a half-court shot against Michigan in the 2010 Big Ten tournament. Just let's not guard a player and let them just cash out and bank it in.
But like, I mean, from a coaching perspective, all the numbers tell you not to guard. I mean, she had.
Yeah, but I feel like you can't. Like these players are on scholarship.
You're D1 players.
I wouldn't say that I'm gonna like deny her the ball, but I would at least be in the vicinity. I feel like, but that's Monday morning quarterback, right? Like I can say that.
Easy to get QB.
Totally. As to what Megan had said about teams that play on Friday, I think if you played Wednesday, you get the boost Thursday. But then on Friday, if you're that team, you get fatigued.
Yeah.
If you play Thursday, Friday's your boost. Saturday would be the game where you're like, man, we've played 2 games the last 2 days. I'm starting to feel it in my lungs. I'm starting to feel it in my legs. But there is like the second game, you're way more comfortable. Whereas the first game, there's always like the feeling out period, a little bit of uncomfort with maybe or discomfort, I should say, with the environment, the rims. you've had some time off, it can be weird depending on when you played last. That's a real thing. That's a very real thing. And one more thing about the women's thing, it pays to be a Nike athlete that Nike wants to put out there, because Caitlin Clark's billboard reminded me of like LeBron's thing in Cleveland, or you think about, I've seen a Reggie Miller mural in Indianapolis that like spans the whole side of a building. That thing was sick. That was well done by Nike. When they want to pump you, they put out tight stuff, and Caitlin Clark gets tight stuff.
And I will say this, Rob, because you played at Target Center when you were with the Timberwolves, like it gets loud in there, and it was packed. I mean, it was sold out, the tournament was. But for those Iowa games, like when Clark hit a three, and she didn't start out great in the two games, actually, which was interesting. But when she finally knocked down her first three of the game in the first game, I mean, the roof practically blew off the building.
Yeah. Well, sadly, the Timberwolves, when I was there, didn't know that much.
They do now, though. They do now.
They do now, because they're good now. They're good now.
Carver Hawkeye North is what the Iowa Hawkeye coaches were calling it. Is that valid, Megan? Like, was it like that?
100%. I mean, it was all black and gold. 100%. All the kids had signs. Like, it was insane to see. It, Zora, I almost feel like we are a little numb to it at this point. I'm kind of at the point of taking it for granted, just like all of the Caitlin Clark Iowa stuff that you see. But it is, if you haven't been around a women's basketball program like Iowa, where it's just absolute hoopla right now, it is really fascinating to see the interest and how people have absolutely caught on and taken this by storm.
Robbie, what men's fans do you think are going to travel the best to Mini this week?
It's a good question. I fear for our attendance numbers. I don't know. I think it'll be different, because Indianapolis and Chicago, you have so many fan bases that are drivable, right? Like you've got Illinois, you've got Northwestern, you've got Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Indiana, Purdue, Iowa, and Wisconsin, that are all like legitimate candidates to drive. And I would say for Minneapolis, it's more so Wisconsin is probably 3 or 4 hours from Minneapolis. 4 hours. Iowa's 4.5. So that obviously the women's program proves that that's very doable. Iowa has a lot to prove and play for. They're a team that could still play their way into the NCAA tournament with a big showing here. So I'm hoping that maybe their fans will travel, but I know that the men's team has had some issues with attendance this year, which is kind of crazy because the women's team sells out every game. The wrestling team sells out Carver Hawkeye as well. I know Patrick McCaffrey made a comment before senior night that he didn't know how the crowd would be because he hadn't thought it had been good all year long. So I don't know. I'm a little apprehensive. I know DC wasn't great attendance-wise. Hopefully we'll get people to travel. Hopefully, Minneapolis is a sneaky city in terms of Big Ten alumni. There's a lot of companies up in Minneapolis, and when you've got a lot of Midwest companies, you have to assume they'll hire a lot of Big Ten graduates. So fingers crossed, but I'm unsure. I'm unsure.